It was a day like any other. The sun hung in a perfect blue sky, casting its warm light over Earth's quiet cities. People went about their usual business, work, school, the little routines that made up the fabric of life. The world felt peaceful, safe. No one suspected that it would all change in an instant. Then the sky cracked open. It didn't come in a flash of light or a loud bang. It came with the heavy silence of a storm long brewing, waiting to break. People looked up, their heads tilting toward the heavens, trying to make sense of what they saw. Strange shapes, vast and dark, moving in orbit. Ships. Gigantic, hulking ships that blocked out the stars, their forms alien in every sense of the word. They came in swarms, like a cloud of locusts, their massive bodies hanging like a dark omen over the planet. And from that moment, everything changed. The broadcast came shortly after. It was everywhere, on the news, on radios, even on the phones people carried in their pockets. The words from the screen were cold, emotionless, as if the speaker didn't care about the lives hanging in the balance. "We are the Zarthos," the voice boomed. "Your world is ours now. Surrender your planet, your resources, your lives. You will serve us or we will destroy you." The words hit like a blow. No one knew who the Zarthos were. No one had ever heard of them. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't negotiate. They simply arrived, claiming Earth as their own, offering nothing but destruction for those who resisted. Zareth, the Zarthos leader, spoke with an arrogance that seemed to shake the air itself. He made it clear that humans were nothing more than insects to them. "We have crushed entire worlds, and your species is no different," he sneered, as if Earth's fate was already sealed. "Bow to us now, and we may spare your lives. Resist, and you will be wiped from existence." For most, the idea of fighting back seemed impossible. The Zarthos ships were too advanced, too powerful. The very sight of them, enormous vessels glistening with strange energy, was enough to make people believe that their world was doomed. How could humanity stand up against such an overwhelming force? How could they hope to survive against an enemy who had already conquered countless star systems? But even as panic spread, there was something else simmering beneath the surface. Something that couldn't be seen on the surface, something that the Zarthos had failed to notice. It was the quiet that followed, the momentary silence after Zareth's message, before humanity's response. In the shadows, hidden deep beneath the surface of Earth, the old warships began to awaken. These ships were not made of the shiny, advanced metals of modern technology. They were old, ancient even, rusted, cracked, and weathered by time. They were relics of an era long forgot, from a time when Earth was not just a peaceful planet but a fierce empire of explorers and warriors. These ships were not built for peace but for war, and they had been hiding for centuries, waiting for a time when they would be needed. No one on Earth truly knew the full extent of what lay beneath their feet. The governments, the military, the civilians, they had all been kept in the dark. The old warships were hidden away in the deepest bunkers, in secret underground vaults, preserved for a time when humanity would need them most. Captain Alina Griggs was one of the few who knew about them. She was the daughter of a general who had led humanity's last great war, an ancestor who had fought in the old days when Earth had been strong. Her father had always warned her that a time would come when the world would need to remember its strength. And now, that time had come. She was standing in a dark, steel-lined room when the order came through. The old ships were ready. They had been restored. They were coming back to life. Captain Griggs didn't hesitate. She knew the stakes. Earth was on the edge of destruction, and the Zarthos were not going to show mercy. The ships may have been old, but their weapons were as deadly as any the aliens had ever faced. They were humanity's last hope, and Captain Griggs would not let them fall. "We have no choice now," she muttered to herself, clenching her fists. "We fight or we die." The world was trembling. News stations reported the arrival of alien soldiers, their first assault troops landing in cities around the globe. People ran, screamed, tried to hide. But the Zarthos were everywhere, hovering over buildings, walking the streets, their presence undeniable. But it wasn't the aliens on the ground that humanity feared the most. It was the fleet above, the ships still blocking out the sky. And yet, even as the world fell into chaos, even as fear gripped the hearts of every person on Earth, there was something else stirring, something that couldn't be measured in technology or ships. It was humanity's spirit, the will to fight, to survive. Captain Griggs didn't need to be told what to do. She knew what had to happen next. With a single command, humanity's warships, some of them older than nations, began to rise, their engines roaring to life as they broke free from their hidden bunkers. The battle for Earth was just beginning, and the Zarthos had no idea what they had just unleashed. The Zarthos believed they had already won. They were so sure of their power, so confident that humanity would crumble under their heel. As their massive ships hovered above the cities, sending down armies of invaders, the world seemed to hold its breath. Fear spread like wildfire, and many believed there was no hope. How could Earth's forces, obsolete, underfunded, possibly stand against an enemy so vast and advanced? But the Zarthos had overlooked something crucial. The human race had been hiding something for centuries. While the aliens thought Earth was nothing more than a quiet, peaceful world of civilians and technology too outdated to be of any use, they had no idea what lurked beneath the surface. Deep in forgotten bunkers and hidden vaults, ancient ships, ships built by a long-lost generation of warriors, waiting for this moment. It was hard to imagine, in the midst of the chaos, that anything could turn the tide. But Captain Alina Griggs, who stood on the bridge of a forgotten military base deep underground, knew the truth. She was standing in a room filled with old, dim lights and rusted walls, but she didn't see the decay. She saw the future. Her hands gripped the cold steel of the railing in front of her as her eyes scanned the massive warships rising from the depths of Earth's darkest secrets. Ships that had been hidden away for centuries. Ships so old, they seemed like myths to the people who now walked the Earth's surface. They were humanity's last line of defense, and it was time to bring them back. The Vengeance was the first to rise. Once, it had been the crown jewel of humanity's space fleet, a ship that had been built for war, designed to cut through enemy forces with ruthless efficiency. But now it was old, battered by years of neglect, its engines running on ancient fuel and its hull covered in corrosion. Still, it had teeth. Its massive cannons were powered by the same energy that had once turned the tide of wars long ago. Behind it came the Nemesis, a ship that had been built for sheer destruction. The Nemesis was a beast, heavily armored, its exterior thick with decades of wear. Yet within its heart, it still carried enough firepower to level entire fleets. As the engines powered up and the long-dormant weapons systems hummed back to life, the ship's once dormant sensors flared, and its enormous cannons glowed with deadly light. The warships weren't just relics. They were the weapons of a bygone era, built for a time when humanity had faced an enemy more fearsome than the stars themselves. In those days, Earth's leaders had known the value of strength, of survival, of never backing down no matter the cost, and now that legacy was awakening. Captain Griggs stepped forward, her boots clicking against the floor. Her uniform, a combination of the old and the new, seemed almost like a symbol of what was to come. She wasn't just a soldier. She was the last of her kind, carrying the hopes of humanity's past, present, and future. Her father, General Thomas Griggs, had been the last leader of humanity's military might before the world turned to peace. He had prepared her for this day, though she had never wanted to believe it would come. Now, as she stared out at the massive warships leaving their hangars, she felt a cold determination wash over her. There was no turning back. "The old ships are back," Alina whispered under her breath, "and so are we." The time for hiding was over. Across the world, people were still reeling from the shock of the Zarthos invasion. Alien soldiers marched down the streets, their metallic bodies shining like living armor. Civilians were rounded up, herded into camps, and the sound of blaster fire echoed through the air. Every attempt to resist was met with overwhelming force. But beneath the chaos, something else was happening. In every hidden military base, across the deep vaults of old war stations, the systems of humanity's ancient fleet were awakening. Across the globe, hidden doors were opening, revealing ships that had not been seen in generations. One by one, the old warships powered up. The ancient machinery creaked and groaned as it hummed back to life. Crews, most of them volunteers, some of them descendants of old military families, some of them regular civilians who had been trained in secret, rushed to their stations. There was no fanfare, no speech, just the quiet determination that comes when you know what's at stake. The Vengeance was the first to leave Earth's atmosphere, a massive silhouette against the stars. Behind it, the Nemesis followed. And then came the Revenge, the Tempest, the Wrath. Each ship a monument to humanity's forgotten strength, each one a ghost of a past that had been buried too deep in history. The Zarthos fleet, so sure of their dominance, did not see what was coming. The alien forces, who had already begun to round up human prisoners and claim Earth's resources, did not know that they were about to be confronted by something they could not even comprehend. They expected easy victories, but now the humans had no intention of surrendering. Back on Earth, in the heart of the war, Captain Griggs stood by the command deck of the Vengeance. Her mind raced as she saw the massive alien ships above, their weapons primed and ready. She could hear the distant sound of destruction as the battle began. She took a deep breath, knowing that the lives of billions rested on her shoulders. "Commander Griggs," a voice called from behind her. She turned, meeting the eyes of her second-in-command, Lieutenant Marcus Hale. "It's time," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. He nodded, "Ready when you are, Captain." Together, they turned to face the battle ahead. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for revenge, for the people who had fallen, for the history that had been hidden away. And most importantly, they were fighting for the future. The roar of ancient engines echoed through the metal halls, a sound that felt like thunder on a distant world. It was the sound of the old warships coming to life. Captain Alina Griggs stood in the heart of the Vengeance, the first of humanity's ancient warships to break free from its long slumber. The air was thick with the hum of revived technology, with the whispers of forgotten histories swirling around her. The Vengeance was old, older than most of the cities still standing on Earth, but it was still deadly. It was still humanity's might, lying in wait, ready for the moment when the world needed it most. That moment had arrived. Outside, the Zarthos fleet loomed in the sky, ships that stretched across the heavens, casting their dark shadows over every corner of Earth. The invaders had no idea what was about to hit them. They had thought Earth was helpless, a simple world of civilians too weak to defend themselves. They were wrong. With a deep breath, Captain Griggs turned to her crew. The command deck was a mix of veterans from old Earth wars and young soldiers who had volunteered for the fight, their faces determined, their eyes full of fire. Many of them had never seen battle, but they all knew what was at stake. "Alina," Lieutenant Hale said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. "We're online. All systems are green." Griggs nodded. Her hands moved over the old, cracked controls as the Vengeance's massive engines roared to full power. It had been so long since anyone had commanded a warship of this size. The ship had been dormant for centuries, but now it was alive, and so was humanity's hope. "Prepare to launch," she ordered, her voice clear and sharp. There was no hesitation, no fear, only the fire of defiance. "Set course for the enemy fleet. It's time to show them what humanity is made of." The Vengeance slowly moved out of the hangar bay, its massive body leaving the surface of Earth behind as it soared into the sky. The view from the command deck was breathtaking. The vast Zarthos fleet spread out across the horizon, a sea of terrifying ships that seemed to blot out the stars. But beneath them, the small human ships, once thought to be relics, now rose to challenge them. A few ships against an armada. The odds were terrible, but there was something that the Zarthos couldn't understand. These ships were more than just steel and weapons. They were symbols of everything humanity had survived. "We're not just fighting to live," Griggs said to herself as the Vengeance broke through the atmosphere. "We're fighting to remind them, to remind the galaxy." The first blast of energy came from the Zarthos flagship, a bright, blinding ray that shot through space, striking one of the smaller human ships. The ship exploded in a flash of light, debris scattering through the cold vacuum of space. The aliens believed that one shot would be enough to end the fight. They were wrong. The Vengeance was the first to respond. The old ship's cannons groaned to life, firing back with a force that sent shockwaves through space. The blast hit one of the Zarthos ships dead-on, and it crumpled like a tin can under the weight of the strike. It was only the beginning. One after another, the human ships opened fire, their weapons flaring with energy as they tore into the alien fleet. The Nemesis, the Revenge, the Tempest, every ship had its part to play. The Zarthos were quick to retaliate, launching waves of fighters to meet the human ships head-on. A battle ensued, the vacuum of space crackling with weapons fire as the two forces collided in the blackness. But the human ships didn't back down. They didn't retreat. They fought as if they had nothing to lose. Captain Griggs watched as the Vengeance took another hit, a direct strike that sent a tremor through the entire ship. Sparks flew from the control panels. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure, but it held firm. The ancient engines hummed with power, and the crew didn't flinch. "Status report," Griggs barked, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Shields at 75%, Captain," Lieutenant Hale called from his station. "But we're holding. We're still in the fight." Griggs clenched her jaw. "We've come this far, we finish it." As the Vengeance moved to engage the Zarthos flagship, the battle seemed to slow in her mind. She thought about all the lives lost, all the generations that had lived through wars and struggles. She thought about her father, the general who had led Earth's military years before. He'd always said, "We fight because we have to. And when we fight with everything." "Engage the flagship," she ordered. The Vengeance surged forward, its weapons blazing as it raced toward the heart of the Zarthos fleet. Griggs knew that this was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. If they could take down the Zarthos flagship, they could break their will to fight. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth fighting for ever was. The two ships collided, the Vengeance slamming into the Zarthos flagship with a roar of fury. Explosions erupted around them as the human warship pushed forward, tearing into the alien vessel's defenses. The alien forces tried to regroup, but it was too late. The humans had tasted victory, and they weren't about to give it up. The Vengeance's final shot hit the Zarthos flagship's core. The ship exploded in a brilliant burst of energy, sending shockwaves through space. The remaining Zarthos ships hesitated, their ranks broken, their morale shattered. They had underestimated humanity. Griggs stood at the command deck, breathing heavily. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The Zarthos had learned the hardest lesson of all: never underestimate humanity's will to fight. They weren't done yet. But Earth had won the first round, and that was enough to ignite the fire of hope in the hearts of every human still alive. The stars above Earth had never seemed so distant, so cold. The alien fleet, once so sure of its power, was now scattered across the heavens. The Zarthos ships were crippled, their once proud formation shattered by the ferocity of humanity's ancient warships. But even in their defeat, the Zarthos were not finished. As the battle raged on, Captain Alina Griggs stood at the bridge of the Vengeance, her heart pounding in her chest. The Vengeance had delivered the final blow to the Zarthos flagship, but there was no time to rest. The fight was far from over. The remaining Zarthos ships, though damaged, had not retreated. They were angry, they were determined, and they would not let humanity win so easily. "Captain," Lieutenant Hale said, his voice strained, "the enemy is regrouping. They're calling in reinforcements from deep space." Griggs' eyes narrowed as she stared at the tactical map flickering on the screen. More ships were arriving, faster than expected, and they were bringing everything they had. The first wave had been a victory, yes, but now humanity was facing an even more desperate fight. The Zarthos would throw everything they had at Earth. "They think we'll fold," Griggs muttered, gripping the armrest of her chair, her fingers digging into the cold metal. "They think they've beaten us. Let's make sure they understand they've only just woken up a sleeping giant." The Vengeance groaned as its system stabilized. The shields were down to 40%, the hull scorched from the fierce battles. The ship was old, but it was still standing, still ready to fight. "Captain," Hale continued, "we've got a new threat. One of their warships is bigger than anything we've seen before. It's heading right for us." Griggs swallowed, a knot forming in her stomach. She knew the kind of ship he was talking about. The Zarthos had many types of warships, but this one was different. Massive, heavily armed, and designed to crush everything in its path. If they couldn't stop it, Earth would be finished. "Deploy the Nemesis and Revenge," Griggs ordered. "We need to hit them hard. I'll take the Vengeance straight for that warship. No hesitation, no fear." As the command was relayed through the ship, the crew moved swiftly, taking their stations. They had trained for this. They had prepared for the worst, and now the worst had arrived. The massive alien warship loomed closer in the distance, its enormous guns charging up, ready to destroy anything in its path. As it powered its weapons, a deep rumble shook the Vengeance, and Griggs could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. She didn't have time to second-guess herself. The lives of billions were on the line. "Steady," Griggs said, more to herself than anyone else. "Steady." The Vengeance surged forward, its engines lighting up the void as it cut through space toward the alien ship. Behind it, the Nemesis and Revenge followed, their weapons already blazing, sending streams of deadly energy into the heart of the Zarthos fleet. The aliens retaliated with force, their own weapons cutting through the darkness like lightning. The battle was chaos. Explosions lit up the sky as human and alien ships clashed in a brutal dance of destruction. Griggs watched in grim determination as the Vengeance fired its first volley, striking the enemy warship dead on. The impact sent ripples through space, and for a moment, Griggs allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The enemy had felt their first real blow. But it wasn't enough. The Zarthos warship unleashed its weapons in response, a beam of energy so powerful that it shook the Vengeance to its core. Alarm screamed, and Griggs gritted her teeth as the ship rocked violently. She could see the cracks forming on the ship's hull, the damage spreading across the exterior. But the Vengeance was still standing. "Status report," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Shields down to 30%. Hull integrity at 65%. The crew shouted back, their voices tense but focused. "We're not done yet," Griggs snapped. "Keep firing, focus on their engines." The Vengeance lurched forward, pushing through the pain and damage as it neared the alien warship. The Nemesis and Revenge continued to provide covering fire, their weapons flashing brightly as they hammered the Zarthos forces. It was a chaotic, furious fight, the stars around them filled with the debris of broken ships. Then the moment of truth arrived. The Vengeance and the alien warship met head-on in a brutal clash, the massive human ship ramming into the side of the Zarthos vessel. Griggs could feel the entire ship shudder as its weapons fired point-blank, ripping through the enemy's defenses. The energy beams from the Vengeance struck their target with unrelenting force, piercing the alien ship's thick armor. For a moment, it seemed as if the Vengeance would be overwhelmed. The Zarthos ship was huge, far larger than anything humanity had, and it had no intention of surrendering. But there was one thing the Zarthos had failed to consider, one thing they didn't understand about humans. Humans didn't know how to quit. Griggs slammed her fist against the control panel as another strike hit. The ship's warning lights flashed, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. "We're almost there," she shouted, her voice sharp with determination. "One more strike, do it now." The Vengeance fired its last, most powerful shot, a full barrage of energy that pierced the heart of the Zarthos warship. For a long, terrifying moment, the two ships seemed locked in a deadly embrace. Then, with a final, deafening explosion, the Zarthos warship was consumed by fire and smoke, its massive body breaking apart and falling into the depths of space. The battle was far from over, but the Zarthos had learned something that would haunt them forever. Humanity could not be broken. No matter how old their ships were, no matter how outgunned they were, humanity would fight. And in that fight, they would never surrender. The roar of the Vengeance's engines echoed through space, a constant hum that seemed to vibrate in the bones of every crew member aboard. The enemy fleet was broken. The massive Zarthos warship that had once been the heart of their strength was now a mass of debris floating in the cold void. But the fight was far from over. The other Zarthos ships, though damaged, still hung in the heavens, their arrogance unshaken. They had underestimated humanity, but now their pride was their weakness. Captain Alina Griggs stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, her eyes fixed on the battle ahead. The alien forces were regrouping, their ships moving into new formations as they prepared for a final strike. The sight of the fallen warship, burning in the distance, was both a victory and a warning. The Zarthos were not going to let humanity's defiance go unanswered. "We've taken down their flagship," Griggs said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "But they're not giving up. They won't stop until we're all gone. We have to keep pushing." Lieutenant Hale, standing next to her, nodded. His face was pale from the damage they'd sustained, but there was no fear in his eyes, only determination. "We'll keep fighting, Captain. We've got one shot left at this." The crew had already seen how quickly things could change. The Vengeance had been battered, its systems pushed to the edge of failure, but it was still alive, still fighting. Humanity had always found a way to survive, no matter how impossible the odds seemed, and today would be no different. "Bring the Nemesis and Revenge into formation," Griggs ordered. "We're going to hit them where it hurts." The crew scrambled, moving with the quiet precision of soldiers who knew that every second mattered. Every decision they made now could mean the difference between life and death for billions of people. The air on the bridge was thick with the weight of that responsibility. The remaining Zarthos ships, now reorganized, formed a battle line. Their weapons glowed menacingly in the dark void of space, ready to tear into anything that dared approach. Their arrogance had returned, but it was fragile as the belief that their victory was certain. Humanity was different. They had something the Zarthos couldn't understand, a refusal to bow down. "Firing range in 30 seconds, Hale called out, his voice low but full of conviction. Griggs gripped the armrests of her command chair, her knuckles white. Her eyes never left the tactical display in front of her. The battle had been brutal, but they were closer now than ever before. They could win this. They would win this. She refused to believe otherwise. "All weapons are ready," Hale said, his voice strong despite the fatigue that threatened to break through. "We've got one chance to finish this." "We take it," Griggs replied. "Fire everything we've got." The Vengeance roared as its weapons came to life. The ship's cannons fired with a blinding flash of light, sending deadly bolts of energy into the heart of the Zarthos line. The Nemesis and Revenge followed suit, their weapons joining the barrage. Explosions lit up the dark sky, the shockwaves from the blasts shaking the Vengeance and sending ripples through space. The Zarthos ships, caught off guard by the force of the attack, staggered backward. The Vengeance surged forward, its engines pushing it toward the Zarthos flagship, now a mere shell of its former self. Griggs could feel the ship strain as it cut through the wreckage, its hull groaning under the pressure, but they couldn't stop. Not now, not after everything they had fought for. "Keep them off our tail," Griggs shouted. "We need to finish this." The Nemesis and Revenge continued to fight, their weapons sending waves of energy into the Zarthos ships, cutting through their ranks. The remaining Zarthos vessels fought back fiercely, but there was something different in the air now. Something had changed. The humans had shown the aliens that they weren't just going to roll over and die. The warships, despite their age, were tearing into the heart of the alien forces with a strength that surprised even the aliens themselves. Grig's heart pounded in her chest as the Vengeance closed in on the Zarthos flagship, now the only ship left in their way. The ship was damaged, its shields flickering and its weapons firing erratically, but it was still dangerous, and if they weren't careful, it could still destroy them all. "Brace for impact," Griggs ordered, her voice steady even as the ship lurched under the force of another explosion. The Vengeance pushed forward, firing relentlessly. The final blow came when the Vengeance fired its last, most powerful shot, a beam of energy that ripped through the Zarthos flagship's core. The ship groaned, its massive frame shuddering as it was torn apart. For a moment, the whole universe seemed to pause. Then, with a burst of light that illuminated the darkness of space, the Zarthos flagship exploded in a brilliant, fiery death. The shockwave rippled outward, sending fragments of the once mighty ship scattering in all directions. The remaining Zarthos ships, seeing their last hope vanish in an instant, hesitated. "They're retreating," Hale said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's over." Griggs watched as the Zarthos fleet began to fall back, their ships turning and racing into the void, trying to escape the wrath of humanity's defiance. They had come to conquer, to subjugate, but instead they had learned a brutal truth: humanity would never be subjugated. The Vengeance floated in the aftermath of the battle, battered but victorious. Griggs sat in her chair, her eyes scanning the space around them. It was over. The Zarthos had been defeated. Earth had been saved. But there was no celebration, no cheers, not yet. The crew knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The scars of this battle would stay with them, but they had proven something. They had proven that humanity would never give up, no matter how dark the sky, no matter how powerful the enemy. They would fight, and they would win. And the galaxy would never forget what happened here. The silence after the battle felt heavy, oppressive. The stars were still, like spectators watching the aftermath of a storm. The last of the Zarthos fleet had retreated into the vast darkness of space, leaving behind only the shattered remains of their once mighty armada. The Vengeance drifted in the void, its damaged hull creaking, its crew exhausted but alive. The victory had been hard-earned, but it was theirs. Captain Alina Griggs stood on the bridge, her eyes focused on the view outside the windows. The distant light of the stars flickered calmly, as if the universe itself had taken a deep breath. Her fingers rested on the controls, but for once she couldn't bring herself to give another order. The battle was over. The Zarthos were defeated. Earth was safe. "For now." "Captain," Lieutenant Hale said softly, his voice breaking the heavy stillness. "What now?" The question hung in the air like a cloud. What now? Humanity had won a hard-fought battle, but what did it mean in the grand scheme of things? Would the Zarthos return? Was this just a temporary pause in a much larger war? The weight of that uncertainty pressed down on Griggs, making her feel the enormity of what had just happened. "I don't know," Griggs answered, her voice quiet, almost lost in the vastness of space. "But we're not done yet. We have to make sure they understand. We've only just begun." Back on Earth, the world was waking up to the truth. The warships, once hidden away beneath layers of secrecy and time, were now a symbol of humanity's strength. The planet had been saved, but the cost had been high. Cities lay in ruin, thousands had perished, and many more would carry scars from the invasion for the rest of their lives. And yet there was hope, there was strength in survival. Across the globe, humanity had come together in ways they hadn't in centuries. Nations that once stood divided now worked together, their differences forgotten in the face of a common enemy. The old divisions between governments, ideologies, and borders seemed small now. They were just words on paper compared to the threat they had just faced. For the first time in a long while, humanity had realized something important. They were stronger together than apart. But Griggs knew that peace would be fleeting. The Zarthos were a proud race. Their defeat, though humiliating, would not be forgotten. They would return and they would bring more ships, more forces, more fury. Earth had become a target, a symbol of defiance that the Zarthos would never allow to go unpunished. "Are we ready for another fight?" Griggs muttered to herself, her thoughts racing as she stared out at the vast emptiness of space. The question wasn't rhetorical, she knew the answer. They had to be ready. There was no other option. Hale came up beside her, his eyes also fixed on the stars. "They'll be back, we both know it." Griggs nodded. "Then we'll be waiting." In the heart of Earth's unified government, leaders gathered in a war council, still in shock from the events that had unfolded. Representatives from every corner of the globe sat around a massive table, their faces grim but determined. They had lost so much, but they had also gained something invaluable. The battle had shown them what humanity was capable of when united. Now, they had to prepare for what was coming next. "We have to rebuild," General Novak, the head of Earth's combined military forces, said as he looked out over the room. "The Zarthos won't give up after today. We need to reinforce our defenses, build more warships, train more soldiers. We need to be ready." "We don't have time," Griggs spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 battles fought. She had just returned from the Vengeance to brief the Council on the fleet's status. "The Zarthos won't wait for us to rebuild. If we don't act fast, we'll be sitting ducks the next time they show up." "What are you suggesting, Captain?" Novak asked, his brow furrowing in concern. "We've shown them what we're capable of," Griggs said, her voice hardening with the conviction of someone who had seen the destruction firsthand. "We can't wait for them to strike again. We need to take the fight to them." The room fell silent, the idea weighing heavily on everyone present. The idea of sending humanity's fleet into the unknown, to the Zarthos' homeworld, was a risk that few were willing to take. But Griggs knew it was the only way to ensure their survival. If they let the Zarthos recover and come back stronger, it could be the end of Earth. "We've been on the defensive for too long," Griggs continued, her eyes hard. "It's time we go on the offensive. We take the fight to them before they have the chance to rebuild." General Novak stood slowly, his hand resting on the table. "It's a dangerous gamble," he said, "but you're right, we have no other choice." The room was filled with a quiet murmur of agreement. They all knew the risks. They all understood what was at stake, but the decision was made. "We'll do it," Novak said, turning to the other leaders. "Prepare our forces. We go to the Zarthos. We make sure they never threaten Earth again." Griggs returned to the Vengeance, her mind heavy with the burden of the task ahead. The ship was battered, its systems stretched to their limits, but it was still the best hope Earth had. She knew the coming war would not be easy. The Zarthos would be waiting for them, ready to defend their homeworld with everything they had. But this time, humanity would be the ones on the offensive. She looked out the window at the stars again, her resolve solidifying. "We're not just defending Earth anymore," she whispered to herself. "We're taking the fight to them, and we'll make sure they never forget who they're messing with." As the crew prepared for their final mission, the Vengeance powered up, ready to strike at the heart of the Zarthos Empire. Earth's future had been earned at great cost, but now humanity would make sure it was never taken again. The stars stretched out before them like an endless sea of cold, distant lights. It felt unreal. Earth, so far behind them, was a distant memory now, a place that had been torn apart, rebuilt, and remade by fire. The Vengeance, battered but strong, cut through space at full speed, its engines roaring as it made its way toward the heart of the Zarthos Empire. Captain Alina Griggs stood at the bridge, her eyes fixed on the view ahead. The mission was simple: strike at the Zarthos' homeworld and end the threat before it could ever rise again. But the simplicity of the plan did little to ease the weight of what lay ahead. They were about to face the Zarthos in their own backyard, and Earth's future was hanging by a thread. The crew was silent. Even after all they had been through, after fighting back an invasion and destroying the Zarthos flagship, they knew this was different. This wasn't a battle for survival. This was a battle for revenge, for justice, for the future of their people. "How long until we reach the Zarthos homeworld?" Griggs asked, her voice steady, but there was an undercurrent of determination in it. "3 hours, Captain," Hale replied, his eyes scanning the displays. "The fleet is holding formation. The other ships are ready for the assault." Griggs nodded, taking in the information. She glanced at the tactical display. The enemy was waiting for them. They knew they were coming. The Zarthos had fortified their homeworld, expecting retaliation. It wouldn't be easy. It might even be impossible, but there was no turning back. "All hands," Griggs said, her voice ringing through the ship's speakers. "In 3 hours we'll face the Zarthos at their home. We've come a long way. From the moment they first invaded Earth we've fought. We've lost and we've won. But today we finish it. Together we take the fight to them. No retreat. No surrender." The crew erupted in a quiet but fierce cheer. The words of their captain settled deep into their hearts. The Vengeance wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a symbol of defiance, a symbol of everything humanity had fought for. It was their weapon of hope, and they would use it to make sure no other species could ever threaten Earth again. Hours passed like days. The vastness of space stretched around them, empty and unforgiving, but Griggs couldn't tear her eyes away from the homeworld ahead. The Zarthos were there, waiting, their ships spread out like a deadly shield around their planet. The moment of truth was drawing near. "Captain, we're entering the Zarthos system," Hale's voice broke through her thoughts. "All ships are in position. We're ready to engage." Griggs took a deep breath and turned to her crew. "Let's remind them who they're dealing with." She didn't need to say more. The command was clear. The Vengeance surged forward, its guns primed and ready. The entire human fleet followed, every ship locked in formation. Their target was clear: the heart of the Zarthos homeworld, the planet itself, where their forces were concentrated. As they entered the outer atmosphere, the Zarthos fired. Energy blasts tore through the darkness, and the human fleet returned fire with a fury that shook the void. The sky lit up with the explosion of missiles, laser fire, and blasts from every weapon the human ships had. The Vengeance took the lead, its cannons roaring as it pushed deeper into the fight. "Focus on their capital ship," Griggs shouted, her voice sharp. "Take it out and the rest will follow." The battle became a blur of explosions and fire. The Vengeance moved like a living thing, weaving between enemy ships as its weapons shredded through the Zarthos ranks. The human fleet worked in perfect unison, each ship doing its part to tear down the enemy's defenses. The Zarthos fought back with everything they had, but their arrogance had been shattered. They weren't dealing with an unprepared species anymore. They weren't fighting helpless civilians. They were fighting humanity, and humanity was angry. "Captain, we're taking heavy fire," Hale shouted. "Shields at 30%, hull integrity is failing." Griggs felt the ship shake under the impact, but she didn't flinch. "We're not stopping. Keep pushing forward." The Vengeance and the other ships continued their relentless assault, blasting through the Zarthos' defenses one ship at a time. Griggs could see the Zarthos' homeworld growing closer, the planet now in view. It was beautiful, almost peaceful if it weren't for the destruction in orbit. They were nearly there. One final push and they would be inside the enemy's defenses. But just as victory seemed within their grasp, the biggest threat yet appeared. An enormous warship, larger than anything they had faced before, emerged from the shadow of the planet. Its weapons powered up, and it came charging straight at the human fleet. "This is it," Griggs whispered to herself, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of every life aboard the Vengeance. She could feel the weight of Earth's future in her hands. "All ships focus fire on that warship," Griggs ordered, her voice steady but fierce. "We take it down now or we don't get another chance." The final battle began. The Vengeance and the other ships focused everything they had on the enemy warship. The blast exchanges were deafening, the energy beams cutting through the darkness with terrifying speed. The massive Zarthos ship retaliated with waves of fire, striking the human fleet again and again. The Vengeance shook with every hit, but it kept pushing forward. Griggs could feel the crew's resolve. They weren't going to stop. And then, with a thunderous explosion, the Vengeance unleashed its final, most powerful strike. A beam of concentrated energy, a full-on assault that pierced the heart of the Zarthos warship. The ship shuddered violently, its shields flickering out of existence. With one final, explosive burst, it collapsed into a fiery death. The battle was over. The Zarthos had been defeated. The last of their fleet was scattered in space, their empire torn apart. Griggs stared at the destroyed warship. Her heart was still pounding, but the weight of what they had just achieved began to sink in. Earth had been saved. The Zarthos would never threaten them again. But there was no time to rest. As the human fleet turned back to Earth, Griggs looked out at the stars once more. The battle was over, but the war had changed them all. Humanity had fought and won, and they would never forget the price of that victory. As the human fleet made its way back toward Earth, the weight of their victory began to settle in. The Zarthos were gone, their empire shattered. Humanity had fought with everything they had: ancient warships, modern technology, and an unyielding will to survive. Earth had been saved, but at a cost. The scars of the war would remain for generations, but so would the lessons learned. Captain Alina Griggs stood at the bridge, looking at the stars as they passed. Her heart was heavy, but it was a weight she would carry with pride. They had proven to the universe that humanity would never be conquered. Not by the Zarthos, not by anyone. "We did it," Hale said quietly beside her, his voice filled with both exhaustion and relief. Griggs didn't reply immediately. Instead, she simply nodded. The battle had been won, but the fight had changed them all. They weren't the same species they had been before the invasion. They were stronger, united, and ready for whatever the future held. "Let's go home," she said softly. Earth was waiting, and for the first time in a long while, humanity had the future in its hands.